Well, hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Luis Jaramillo, Director of Creative Writing here at the New School. Welcome. As I'm sure you all know, the work that the founder of the Story Prize, Julie Lindsay, and the director, Larry Dark, do to promote the short story in all its forms is nothing short of extraordinary. And for many years, we've had the honor of hosting the Story Prize here at the New School. In a moment, I'll hand the evening over to the Emcee and interviewer, Larry Dark, but first I'd like to thank a few people. The Story Prize, thank you, of course, to Julie and Larry and to Melissa Olcott. At the New School, thank you to Ben Fama, Pam Tillis, Lori Lynn Turner, Wynn Contos, and Kelly Stewart. And in our booth, Sylvan Simon. We have a thrilling night ahead, and I'm so glad to share this evening here at the New School with you. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage the director of the Story Prize, Larry Dark.
Thank you, Luis, and thanks to the New School for being such a strong partner in co-sponsoring and hosting our annual event for the past 13 years. I'd like to especially thank the Chisholm Foundation for establishing and generously backing the Story Prize. If you haven't yet, make sure your phones are off or on vibrate, or please, Alice. I know if you've come to this before, you've probably heard me say something like this, but I think this year it's particularly true. It's been a remarkable year, 2017, for short story collections. We read 120 of them from 93 different publishers and imprints, and it was harder than ever to narrow it down to 3 books. But we narrowed it down to 3 really great ones. The amount of strong work that comes out every year is remarkable and gratifying, and I believe it leaves those who read it better informed about the human condition. It may be fiction, but it's the realest of real news, and we're lucky to have authors with the courage and determination to write and publish short story collections. Aside from the 3 finalists we honor, for the past several years we've also acknowledged an additional collection with what we call the Story Prize Spotlight Award. Selected books can be promising works by first-time authors, collections in alternative formats, or volumes that demonstrate an unusual perspective on the writer's craft, and the winner receives a prize of $1,000. This year's winner of the Story Prize Spotlight Award is Lee Connell for her smart and beautifully crafted collection Subcortical, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. Lee, would you stand up, please, so we can recognize you? You're welcome. I think we have a few copies for sale out there, along with the signed copies of the finalist books as well from McNally Jackson, who's another partner of ours. Someone pointed out on social media that the titles of this year's finalists read together almost like a haiku, though one with admittedly too many syllables. The king is always above the people, homesick for another world. Anything is possible. Thank you. Tonight, the 3 authors, Daniel Alarcón, Ottessa Moshfegh, and Elizabeth Strout will read from their work and discuss it on stage with me. The evening will end with the founder of the Story Prize, Julie Lindsay, announcing the winner as chosen by our 3 judges, Susan Minot, Walton Mayumba, and Stephanie Sandala. Until then, our focus is very much on learning more about these excellent short story collections and the craft behind them. Before I introduce the first author, I have an announcement that we're excited about. At next year's event, on sale side by side with the books of our finalists, will be an anthology celebrating 15 years of the Story Prize, which Catapult Books will publish. And I wish we could include all of the finalists and winners, but it would be too big a book. So we're sticking with the 14 winners of the prize, and that includes Edwidge Danticat, Tobias Wolff, Claire V. Watkins, George Saunders, Elizabeth McCracken, Adam Johnson, Rick Bass, and several others. So I think it's going to be a good book. And I start work on it tomorrow. Up first tonight is a collection, The King is Always Above the People, published by Riverhead Books, that artfully explores multi-layered issues of culture and identity. Please welcome to the stage Daniel Alarcón.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Larry, and thank you to the Chisholm Foundation Story Prize, to the New School, and all of you for coming. This is super exciting. I'm going to read a brief short story called The Thousands. It's the first story in this collection. There was no moon that first night, and we spent it as we spent our days. Your fathers and your mothers have always worked with their hands. We came in trucks and cleared the land of rock and debris, working in the pale yellow glow of the headlights, deciding by touch and smell and taste that the land was good. We would raise our children here, make a life here. Understand that not so long ago this was nowhere. The land had no owner, and it had not yet been named. That first night, the darkness that surrounded us seemed infinite, and it would be false to say we were not afraid. Some had tried this before and failed. In other districts, on other fallow land, some of us sang to stay awake, others prayed for strength. It was a race, and we all knew it. The law was very clear. While these sorts of things were not technically legal, the government was not allowed to bulldoze homes. We had until morning to build them. The hours passed, and by dawn the progress was undeniable, and with a little imagination one could see the bare outlines of the place this would become. There were tents made of tarps and sticks. There were mats of woven reeds topped with sewn-together rice sacks and sheets of pressboard, leaning against the scavenged hoods of old cars. Everything the city discarded we'd been saving for months in preparation for this first night, and we worked. And we worked, and for good measure spent the last hours of that long night drawing roads on the earth, just lines of chalk then, but think of it, just think. We could see them, the avenues they would be, even if no one else could. By morning it was all there, this ramshackle collection of odds and ends, and we couldn't help but feel pride. When we finally stopped to rest, we realized we were cold, and on the soft slope of the hill, dozens of small fires were built, and we warmed ourselves, each taking comfort in it, in our numbers, in this land we had chosen. The morning dawned pale, the sky scoured clean and cloudless. It's pretty, we said, and yes, the mountains were beautiful that morning. They still are. The government arrived before noon and didn't know what to do. The bulldozers came and we stood arm in arm, encircling what we had built and did not move. These are our homes, we said, and the government scratched its febrile head. It had never seen houses like ours. Our constructions of wire and aluminum, of quilts and driftwood, of plastic tarps and rubber tires. It came down off its machines to inspect these works of art. We showed the government the places we'd made, and finally it left. You can have this land, it said. We don't want it anyway. The newspapers wondered where the thousands had come from, how we had done it, and the radio asked as well, and the television sent cameras, and little by little we told our story, but not all of it. We saved much for ourselves, like the words of the songs we sang or the content of our prayers. One day, the government decided to count us, but it didn't take long before someone decided that task was impossible, and so new maps were drawn. And on the empty space that had existed on the northeastern edge of the city, the cartographers now wrote the Thousands. And we liked that name because numbers are all we'd ever had. Of course, we are many more than that now. Thank you.
Thank you. Later in the collection, there's another story that mentions a neighborhood called the Thousands in Lima. Is this the same neighborhood, the same place?
Well, it never says it's in Lima.
In that story?
In any story.
No.
I think.
No. The dentist story definitely says Lima.
The dentist story definitely says Lima, yes. But no, the Thousands is really a stand-in for a place where I lived called, it was a neighborhood called 10 de Octubre in a district called San Juan de Lurigancho in the northeastern edge of Lima. You know, the story of the Thousands and its recurrence you know, I think I owe a lot to that time that I spent living in 10 de Octubre. I owe a lot to the myth that I heard of the way that this place was founded. And that's sort of what I was trying to recreate. It's a polyphonic, you know, plural first person, because so many people had different versions of that founding of the neighborhood. And it took me a while, actually, living in the neighborhood, before I realized that 10 de Octubre, October 10th in Spanish, referred to an actual date on the calendar, an actual year, when the neighborhood was founded. And it was founded much in this way that I described. And I always marveled at the fact that the people that I met, it was you know, people who were my age now, the age that I am now, you know, with young families who had done this. It takes a great deal of imagination to see these rather inhospitable hills at the edge of Lima and say, okay, I'm going to make a life here.
Was that the inspiration for the collection, or is it something that maybe you wrote later as an opener for it?
I think collections are like mixtapes, you know? I mean, I think it's more like you write a bunch of stories, and then I mean, at least in my case, then at a certain point you look back and you're like, oh, I think I have enough stories for a collection, let me see what they are. And then in conversation with your editor or with friends, you start discovering what the themes are. And what you really see are what your obsessions have been over, you know, the previous, you know, 5, 6, 7 years. And in my case, it became clear there were stories that existed that did not fit in this collection, and then there were stories that did. And I think the Thousands was a really nice way to almost like an incantation, and that was something that my editor Laura saw that I didn't quite see, and that's part of the really lovely process of putting a collection together. Is it's like having a map of your obsessions and of your concerns and the things that have been troubling you, and then you see them and you can put them in this order, and ideally they become more than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, and people talk about connected stories, but it's rare for me to read a collection that isn't connected by the author's interests and obsessions and so forth. So.
Yeah, and in this case, what you mentioned, you know, it's connected by geography too. I mean, it's not a geography that you can find on a map, but there are several stories that reference different invented parts of my version of Lima.
It's interesting, actually, all 3 books have these invented places, I think. That might be proven wrong, but because I look up sometimes just to, well, where is this place? And sometimes you can't find it. You start with the first person plural, and then you have a second person story. I noticed there's a lot of different voices and approaches in this.
Yeah, I mean I think you're always, I mean, I'm always trying to play and entertain myself, and try new things. I mean, there's a very long story that has a one-act play in the middle, a piece of theater. There's, as you mentioned, a story that's in the second person. There's this story that's written deliberately to sound like a myth, and I think all of that is just me trying to have fun. I've always thought that if I'm having fun writing, then the reader will have fun reading, and that's optimistic, I think. But I don't have any other way to approach it. You know, I don't have an ideal audience in mind. I'm just trying to entertain myself.
I think that does work. At least it works for me, because it feels like you're saying, like, you know, let's play.
Yeah.
Let's play together here.
I mean, there's any number of, I mean, you know, like, work is everywhere, especially now. It's like we're always working. I think one of the things that's beautiful about literature is that it's an invitation to say, hey, like, step outside, you know, the continuous churn of obligations that one has, and live in an imaginary world for, you know, a period of time. A novel demands, you know, in my case, 3 weeks, because I have 2 young kids. But, you know, a story is something you can read in one sitting, and just escape. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I mean, I don't know. Probably many of you in this room look at your phone, and there's like 10 notifications that the world is ending in 10 different ways, and I think there's nothing wrong with finding solace in art, and maybe not solace. Maybe that's a bit of a dark word, but but just stepping outside this churn of events and going somewhere else.
You actually raised a point when you answered my first question that I'm curious about, and that's that most of the stories don't specify where this is. It will say the capital city, the port city. Is there a particular reason that you decided to do that, to make that choice in these stories?
Yeah, there was a funny conversation I had when my first book of stories came out. There were a number of funny things that happened. So I wrote a collection called War by Candlelight. One thing that happened was that I got these really weird emails that would say, Mr. Alarcón, I really liked your collection of stories. I was wondering if you could recommend a hotel in Cusco. And so, you know, there was this sense of like, you know, you're from Peru, you write a book about Peru, you are therefore, you're the only Peruvian I've ever met, and I haven't even met you. But, you know, please represent your entire country for me.
Right.
And that's a lot of pressure, you know, that's not something that I feel comfortable doing. So there was that, and there was also the sense, particularly when I started working on Lost City Radio, my second book, that I wanted to step outside the confines of history. I was writing a book that was very political, that was taking the post-conflict, post-terrorism period of Peruvian recovery, and I didn't want to be hemmed in by events. I didn't want to be hemmed in by the trajectory of the war, by the geography of the city, by anything. I wanted to take that mood, having read the history and having talked to so many people, take the mood of the place and make it my own. And then I realized that what I was doing was creating an alternate version of Lima, and many of the neighborhoods that are mentioned in this collection were mentioned in that novel as well. Now I feel like I'm going, when I write, I often go to a place that's that version of Lima. And there's something that happened in that first collection. Someone wrote me, I said, I'm from Pakistan, and I'm not, you know, the way you describe Lima, it sounds like, you know, I can't remember what city he was from in Pakistan. And I found that to be striking, you know, and sort of reminded me that so many of the issues that, you know, when you talk about a place like Lima, you're talking about mass migration, you know, unchecked growth, poor urban planning. I'm really selling it here.
No one's going to ask you for a hotel.
No one's going to ask me for a hotel in Lima, yeah. You can all stay with me. These are not issues that are unique to Lima. They're you know, they're not. You could talk about them in New York, you know. But there was something that made me think, oh, if the issues that I'm concerned about in Lima are universal in a sense, then let me just, you know, erase it off the map so that you're not distracted by that, and you can come at it from any place.
I think what's changed maybe more recently is that people do have such an easy way to look things up while they're reading. They could look up and see it on a map,
right.
You know, get sidetracked by that. I think I like the non-specific story that it's a city, the capital city. I think that works really well. It keeps you in the story in a weird way.
Yeah.
Specifying might not. It might lead you, you know, into a different path where you're more interested in the actual place than in the place that you're creating for the story.
Yeah, and it's happened too where, you know, someone has asked me, for example, what do you think about the years of terrorism in Peru? And I'll say, well, here's Lost City Radio. This is what I think about it. You know, I spent 350 pages writing this so that I wouldn't have to give you the very short 140 character version of what I think about something that's incredibly complicated and horrible and deserves nuance and subtlety, you know. And I think that that's the other thing that literature can do, is it can accept the complexity of the world and offer that back to the reader in a way that is hopefully illuminating, but hopefully also leaves them with questions.
And not all the stories in this book are set in Peru. There's some in the U.S., right?
And probably those are just as confusing to the reader as the ones in Peru.
They're just as invented a place.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so there was a story called Abraham Lincoln Has Been Shot.
Yeah.
And that's where the issue of play and trying to entertain myself really comes into play. I wanted to write a story about, you look around the United States and you look at how polarized things are politically, and it struck me, without having done any research whatsoever, that a civil war is not a crazy thought. Mm-hmm. This is not the story of like Lin-Manuel reading like the book about Hamilton, and this is like me making a very cursory observation, doing no research at all, and saying like, let me write a story about Abraham Lincoln, in which Abraham Lincoln is like a hipster in Chicago, riding a fixie bike, going to parties, but he's still wearing the same costume, and he has a lover whose name is Manuel, who's narrating the story, and Lincoln wants to be a poet, but he also, wants to be a politician, and he ends up moving to Washington, completely denying that he's gay, and selecting a wife from an asylum and moving to D.C. And the story is narrated years later, when Manuel's working at a call center in Phoenix. Anyway, it's a bizarre story, in which I just wanted to keep adding layers of weirdness on it, just because I found it so, like I remember be typing out those scenes, and there's a scene where Lincoln's like naked, sitting in a chair, and he's cleaning his hat with a wooden toothbrush. And I was just writing that, and I was just like, this is the most ridiculous scene that I've ever written, and I was like, can I make it weirder, And then I made it weirder by saying that the narrator says that, and when he would do this, he would purr like a cat, and it's just like, I don't know. I think that's pretty funny. Yeah. I think that's, and I think that if I can make you smile and I can make myself smile, then what's wrong with that?
It's like Lincoln fan fiction.
It's Lincoln, exactly. Yeah. It's Lincoln fan fiction. That's precisely what it is. Yeah, that's good. I have a new career now.
You can use that.
Yeah, thank you, Larry.
So how does, you said that there were stories that didn't fit into the collection, that there were some that did, yeah. And I felt like they all fit together very nicely. But how does something like that, a story about Lincoln that's a contemporary Lincoln, how does that fit in to the?
Well, because the issues, I think a couple things. I think the stories are very much questions about masculinity. Mm-hmm. Like, what does it mean to be a man in a kind of that's the hashtag version. I think that's a big issue. I think migration and movement, alienation. These are things where my characters are often at points in their life where they're living. They're not living the life they thought they were going to be leading. They're not living either they're geographically or spiritually hemmed in by circumstances and forces they did not foresee. Right. And I find that interesting. I think that's obviously the case. Lincoln is not the main character of the story. The main character is Manuel, and Manuel's story is very much that. It's in that regard. Manuel is not dissimilar to some of my other protagonists, who are also men at these turning points in their lives where they need to make decisions about who they really are.
Yeah, they're in motion. They're they're, I think, grappling with, as you said, who they are. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I was going to say something else about that, but I lost it here. So give me a second.
I've got nowhere to go, actually, so.
We'll just stay here. I think maybe I'll just leave it at that. But one thing I often ask writers is, since you do all kinds of different things, you've got the fiction, you've got your Spanish language podcast, and I guess you teach journalism. And how does short fiction fit into your work generally? Is it something that you always have a story going, or do you kind of turn from one to the other and focus more strongly on that?
I have to, if I want to write these days, I have to plan about 6 months ahead of time. If I want to write fiction, I mean. So there's a story that I've been working on for 10 years called The Auroras. And it took me, every year and a half or so, I would look at it, and I liked many things about it, but I didn't know how it ended. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason I wasn't able to finish it was because I was juggling all these different other tasks. And at a certain point, a friend of mine offered me a place to stay for a couple of weeks, and that's how I was able to finish it, just go there and concentrate. And there really is a level of concentration that is required, or at least in my case, I know there's plenty of ways to do this, but at least in my case, a level of concentration that I just don't have in my daily life. Right. You know, I don't have because I teach, because I am part of a team putting together a podcast that comes out every week. You know, to say nothing of the distractions of domestic life and city life and all that other stuff. So I have to say, okay, if I want to write a story, I just got to remember the idea or trust that it's good enough that in August, when I have time to write, I'll still be excited by it. And if I'm not, you know, if I have 2 weeks, something's going to come out of that. You know, right. Out of sheer boredom, I will end up writing lots of words on a page. But yeah, that's how that story finally got finished. And I think that it's always that. You're always negotiating with reality, and you know, unless you, like, there's writers always talking about their perfect writing space, and there's like photographs of like, you know, like in soft light of like, oh, I need to have this kind of light and this kind of desk, and it's like, who are these people? Right. You know? I mean, I will go to the coffee shop in the corner, or I'll go to the library, or I'll go to my office at Ambulante, or I'll go to my office at Columbia. I'll go anywhere. I have a very, you know, I'll write at the kitchen table. You know, I'll write wherever I can, doing, you know, whatever you got to do it. You know, yeah, I wrote a bunch of stuff. I finished my last novel in the basement, surrounded by trash. You know, and that's fine. It's fine. I don't know. You got to, if you really want to write, you can do it wherever.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks. Oh, sorry. Our second finalist is Homesick for Another World, published by Penguin Press, which takes an incisive, gimlet-eyed view of contemporary lives, getting at deeper truths and foregoing shallow sentiment. Please welcome to the stage Ottessa Moshfegh.
I still don't know what gimlet-eyed means. Somebody explain that to me later. Thanks for having me here, and thanks Larry and Julie and everybody at the Story Prize. I'm excited to read to you from a story called Slumming. Okay, Slumming. You could tell just by looking, grape soda stains on their kids' teeth. Sorry, start over. You could tell just by looking, grape soda stains on their kids' t-shirts, cheap dye jobs, bad teeth. The people of Alna were poor. Some of them liked to huddle on turnouts or thumb rides up and down Route 4, sunburnt and tattooed, but I never thought to stop and pick one up. I was a woman alone, after all. And I didn't want to have to talk to them, get to know them, or hear their stories. I preferred to keep the residents of Alna as part of its scenery. Wild teens, limping men, young mothers, kids scattered on the hot concrete like the town's lazy rats or pigeons. From a distance, I watched the way they congregated, then dispersed, heads hung at mid-level, neither noble nor disconsolate. The trashiness of the town was comforting, like an old black and white movie. Picture an empty street with a broken down car, a child's rusty tricycle abandoned on the curb, a wrinkled old lady scratching herself while watering her dun-colored lawn, the hose twisting perversely in her tight fist, crumbling sidewalks. I played along when I went up there, slipping pennies in and out of the dish on the counter of the Gas Plus on State Street, as though a few cents could make or break me. I made an abysmal living back home teaching high school English, and my ex-husband rarely paid his alimony on time, but by Alna's standards, I was rich. I owned my summer house up there. I'd bought it from the bank for next to nothing, full of cobwebs and tacky wallpaper. It was a 1.5-story bungalow overlooking the Omek River, a sloshy, mile-long tributary to a lake twice the size of Alna itself. The real estate taxes were negligible. The cost of living was a joke. The teenage boys in the sandwich shop in town remembered me from summer to summer because I tipped them the 50 cents change they'd try to give me. Otherwise, I didn't mingle. I'd made the acquaintance of a few of the neighbors, mostly single moms whose teenage children smoked and strollered their own babies around the graveled driveways. An old man across the street had a long beard stained brassy from cigarette smoke. "Hey, neighbor," he'd say, wheezing, if I saw him out walking his dog. But I never felt I was anybody's neighbor. I was only ever just visiting Alna. I was slumming it up there. I knew that. Clark supplied a steady stream of co-eds to occupy the house during the school year. He taught computer programming at the community college 10 miles away in Pittville. I paid him to look after my place. I sometimes got the sense he was overcharging me, inventing problems and costs to inflate his monthly bills, but I didn't care. It was worth the peace of mind. If something went wrong, if the pipes froze or the rent was late, Clark would handle it. He'd wrap the windows once it got cold, fix a leaky faucet, a short circuit, a broken step. And I was glad I never had to deal with any of the tenants. Each summer I drove up to Alna, I'd found the house altered, a new perfume lacing the humid air, menstrual stains on the mattress, hardened bacon grease splattered on the kitchen counter, a fleck of mascara on the bathroom mirror like a squashed fly. I mostly didn't mind these remnants. Having a tenant kept the vagrants out of what would otherwise be an empty shelter from September to June. The street people of Alna were notorious for taking up residence wherever they could find it and refusing to leave, especially during the winters, which were, in Alna, deadly. I think I'll stop there, actually.
So Alna's not a real place either. This is a made-up place, am I
Yeah,
right?
It's an imaginary town. Vaguely upstate New York.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's that fantasy probably a lot of us have. I know I do, where you drive through an area and you say, hey, houses are pretty cheap here. We could have a nice little getaway. I think you kind of take a pin and puncture that balloon with this, with this story.
Yeah, it happens. I mean, I don't know. I feel a lot of my stories have to do with class. And that's not something I intentionally set out to do ever. There's usually a character of one class and a character of another class, and there's some kind of dissonance. Someone is blind to what the other person is experiencing, and vice versa. And I think you see that a little bit between the narrator and Clark. And in that story, Slumming, they find a common ground in using the drugs that they buy from these people that she calls the zombies in the public restroom at the bus station. So you have this sort of like pretty uptight Manhattanite, it's like lower middle class, I guess, woman, using heroin and meth with this guy who she goes on to describe as being pathetic in his arrogance about literature. So they're weird mirrors of each other, and that happens a lot in the stories in my the other books that I write. But you were asking about, the fantasy of like the idyllic fantasy of living a life outside the oppressive boundary of having to compete financially, culturally, with status in a cosmopolitan city. Where, okay, if I go live with these poor people in the country, then I'll really understand what life is. Because that, it's this weird misconception that we have that God is where we aren't, right? And I feel personally in between those two realms, the realm of the idiotic privileged and the realm of the naive whatever. And I could talk about that for hours, but that's the tension between those two places is something that has inspired me a lot in my short stories.
So when you are inspired, where does the story begin for you? With that kind of idea, or do you just start with a...
I'm not really an idea person. I'm more of a musical person, and when I start a story, I maybe know what the first sentence sounds like, or the end of the first paragraph, or the last sentence before the first break, or something like, oh, okay, the cadence is like da 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 da, or whatever, and it might be the sound of a sentence or the after effect of a sentence. I'm not sure what it is, but I'll have that sound in my head, and then I can attempt to write it sort of in the way you compose music, trying to be detached from the meaning, because I don't know the meaning yet. I haven't discovered the story, so I'm just listening. And the best way I can describe it, once I have that phrase, or even just a couple of words, the best way I could describe it is that becomes the DNA for the story. And the way that I could take a hair out of my head. Wait, is this true? If you look at a DNA from anywhere, it will tell you all the instructions for creating the organism. That's exactly the way that I feel when I'm writing. If I have a sentence, all I have to do is go back to that sentence over and over again, and it will tell me what to do for the rest of the story.
And does that sometimes not work out? Do you sometimes
Never.
not get it?
No, it's a 100% success rate strategy.
Because that sounds like you really have to really immerse yourself and then really hear the music of that sentence or that idea or thought.
Oh yeah, I mean it's nerve-wracking, but once you get it, it's ecstatic. I mean, it's like surfing, like when you catch the right wave. I mean, I don't know, I mean, anyone who's felt ecstasy, I mean, that's what it feels like. And that's why I love writing so much. I mean, I love writing because of that experience.
So each story in the book, to you, has a different music, a different feel.
Yeah, I mean, they're all essentially from my imagination. So I know that, and in this collection, I felt very much was a period where I had certain concerns as a human being and as a writer, and I think that they adhere because of that. But yeah, I hope that they sound different.
Yeah, well, for instance, I was just rereading your stories just a couple of days ago, and I noticed the beginning of the second story, Mr. Wu, has a really long sentence.
Yeah.
I actually sat down and counted. I think I got 132 words in that sentence. So is that something that sets tone for the whole story, that kind of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that story is I think it might be the only story in the collection written in third person. And I needed a narrator. I mean, I hadn't actually really thought about the intentionality of that really long sentence, but I think in effect what it did was establish the narrator as being like, no, you're coming with me. And it's very storybook-like. It's not someone, it differs from the other stories because it's not someone speaking to you, it's someone storytelling to you. And that really long sentence somehow cast the line for how the movement of that narrative was going to go, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense to me. So do you just, like Daniel said, he pretty much writes stories, and then when there's a critical mass, thinks about a collection. Do you do that, or are you thinking about a collection, pretty early on in that process?
I knew that I wanted to publish these stories as a collection. And I mean, I'd been writing stories before the collection started, and But it was really, the first story I wrote for the collection was Mr. Wu, and that was significant for me. It's the second story that I ended up putting it second in the collection, but that was a turning point for me in my writing, where I realized, I found something exciting that I wanted to do and investigate. So the stories that preceded were, here's my investigation of that. And by the end, when I wrote A Better Place, the last story in the collection, I was absolutely positive that the collection was complete. Even the story itself ends with a girl going to this monster's house, basically. And the last sentence is like, he opened the door. And it really felt like that door opening was a goodbye to what had been and a welcome to what was coming next for me as a writer and as a person. I knew that I was done.
It's interesting. Are you going to continue to write stories, or
I don't know.
You really know?
Probably.
Yeah.
When I finished the collection, there was something in me that was so heartbroken that it was over, that I remember saying to someone, I'm never writing another short story again. That's it. I can't do it. It was like, but time goes on. I also write novels, and that I don't know how to do both at the same time, really.
How do you know what it is when you start? How do you know that it's a novel or a story?
Well, my process for writing a novel is different. A novel is, maybe I shouldn't be talking about novel writing because we're supposed to be talking about stories. But I know that I know a short story when I hear it, and I know a novel if I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be more than do I really want to do this? Is this the novel?
Right.
And if it's yes, then okay, yes. And then I slow way down and I really think, what am I doing? But with a short story, you have 30 pages, 35 pages max. If you screw up, you just go back. I say this a lot to people about writing when talking about struggles or making mistakes or feeling like you've veered off the maps. You can't make a wrong move. If you go back to the DNA, this works for me. Just go back. It's like going home and finding yourself in the mirror, just go look again. It's all there. So in that sense, you can't make a wrong move.
Are there stories in this collection where that happened, where it went wrong and you went back and were able to?
Yeah, it happens in micro manners throughout the whole process. Yeah, I don't really remember that there was a point where I was like, oh, I was really wrong about this story, but there was a story about this retired widower who gets a job caring for people with developmental disabilities, and in the first draft, they want to go on an excursion for one of the client's birthday, and first he demands to be taken to Hooters. No, sorry, that's in the story. The first version was he demands to go to Las Vegas. So there was a really long version of the story that was completely ridiculous.
Right.
That when it got out of hand like that, I knew that there was a reason I had to write all that, and that was to get essentially back to the smaller version of the story, understanding that there was something sexual and deviant that client wanted. He wasn't going to Las Vegas to see Britney Spears, he wanted to have an insanely deviant experience. So what I ended up doing was having him want to go to Hooters, but then he ends up at Friendly's. And so there's that grave disappointment.
I think people are generally disappointed when they end up at Friendly's, so it doesn't matter where they start.
I've had some good experiences at Friendly's, but not recently. I don't know what's going on.
You have an eye in your stories for things like stains and things that are torn or broken, not working. Where does that come from? Why is that such a strong focus? Well, at least I felt like it was a strong focus.
I think maybe because, well, my initial instinct is to say, well, that's what reality is. Mm-hmm. Like, nothing is perfect. Like, it can look perfect in product. Like, if I took a picture of this and photoshopped it, then I could make it perfect. But I think when you do that, you're rubbing out all of what's interesting about it. Maybe not all, but I'm someone who focuses in on the details and the differences in things. And I focus on that in me and in others, in my environment, and what's happening, and the energy. And in a way, it's like I don't notice the thing unless it's wrong. I mean, maybe that's an essential flaw in why I'm so get worked up so easily. But yeah, I notice things when they're broken. And there's I mean, not to get weird about it, but that is essentially like what life is. I mean, it doesn't last forever. So if something's worn out, there's an inherent depth and meaning to that object because it is like me, not long for this earth, right? So it's beautiful in that way.
Mm. So, yeah, I suppose if you were writing about a charming upstate New York town that was just beautiful and fun, there wouldn't really be much meat to that. There wouldn't be much to say.
Well, I wouldn't have anything to say about it.
Right.
I think that's the difference. I mean, it's not impossible, but I mean, yeah, if everything was perfect, all of the not imperfection, but all of the variety of experience would have to be contained within the characters. I mean, I think like the Stepford Wives, or what you know, like something really strange would have to be going on internally for an environment to be that perfect in fiction. Or else, what's the story? I don't know. That's not my jam.
Just in your normal, everyday experience, are you always noticing these flaws and things, or is that what draws your attention, or is it when you sit down to write the story that's what comes to mind?
No.
It's not even a binary.
No. I mean, I'm definitely I have a very critical eye. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that's generally true.
So there's a music to the story, but there's also a strong visual element.
Yeah, I think so.
And you're actually seeing things as you're writing?
Yeah, I'm not a super visual person, although I love visual art and like looking at things. But when I'm writing, some things come very naturally to me, other things don't, so I have to work hard. And when I'm writing a story that takes place in a house or something, I really meticulously draw out the house to know, okay, where's the window, where's the couch, which way is the sun setting? Because if I really understand that, then I know that if one character is sitting here and the other character is sitting there, this character is going to be able to look out the window to when the person outside comes up to the doorbell, things like that. Things that I might not be able to see just listening, but if I can visualize it, then, I might discover a new dramatic element to the story.
Well, thanks. Thank you.
Go that way? Okay.
Our third and last finalist is Anything is Possible, published by Random House, which, through a series of connected stories, explores the lives of characters who live near or have past connections to the rural town of Amgash, Illinois, and who are struggling with the inescapable repercussions of past events. Please welcome to the stage Elizabeth Strout.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the Story Prize, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm just going to read the first few pages from the first story of this collection called The Sign. Tommy Guptill had once owned a dairy farm, which he'd inherited from his father and which was about 2 miles from the town of Amgash, Illinois. This was many years ago now, but at night, Tommy still sometimes woke with the fear he had felt the night his dairy farm burned to the ground. The house had burned to the ground as well. The wind had sent sparks onto the house, which was not far from the barns. It had been his fault. He always thought it was his fault, because he had not checked that night on the milking machines to make sure they had been turned off properly, and this is where the fire started. Once it started, it ripped with a fury over the whole place. They lost everything except for the brass frame to the living room mirror, which he came upon in the rubble the next day, and he left it where it was. A collection was taken up. For a number of weeks, his kids went to school in the clothes of their classmates, until he could gather himself and the little money he had. He sold the land to the neighboring farmer, but it did not bring much money in. Then he and his wife, a short, pretty woman named Shirley, bought new clothes, and he bought a house as well, Shirley keeping her spirits up admirably as all this was going on. They'd had to buy a house in Amgash, which was a run-down town, and his kids went to school there instead of in Carlisle, where they had been able to go to school before, his farm being just on the line dividing the two towns. Tommy took a job as the janitor in the Amgash school system. The steadiness of the job appealed to him, and he could never go to work on someone else's farm. He did not have the stomach for that. He was 35 years old at the time. The kids were grown now, with kids of their own who were also grown, and he and Shirley still lived in their small house. She had planted flowers around it, which was unusual in that town. Tommy had worried a good deal about his children at the time of the fire. They had gone from having their home be a place that class trips came to. Each year in spring, the 5th grade class from Carlisle would make a day of it, eating their lunches out beside the barns on the wooden tables there, then tromping through the barns, watching the men milking the cows, the white foamy stuff going up and over them in the clear plastic pipes, to having to see their father as the man who pushed the broom over the magic dust that got tossed over the throw-up of some kid who had been sick in the hallways, Tommy wearing his gray pants and a white shirt that had Tommy stitched on it in red. Well, they had all lived through it. This morning, Tommy drove slowly to the town of Carlisle for errands. It was a sunny Saturday in May, and his wife's 82nd birthday was just a few days away. All around him were open fields, the corn newly planted, and the soybeans, too. A number of fields were still brown, as they'd been plowed under for their planting, but mostly there was the high blue sky, with a few white clouds scattered near the horizon. He drove past the sign on the road that led to the Barton home. It still said, "Sewing and Alterations," even though the woman, Lydia Barton, who did the sewing and alterations, had died many years ago. The Barton family had been outcasts, even in a town like Amgash, their extreme poverty and strangeness making this so. The oldest child, a man named Pete, lived alone there now. The middle child was 2 towns away, and the youngest, Lucy Barton, had fled many years ago and had ended up living in New York City. Tommy had spent time thinking of Lucy. All those years she had lingered after school, alone in a classroom, from 4th grade right up to her senior year in high school. It had taken her a few years to even look him in the eye. But now Tommy was driving past the area where his farm had been. These days it was all fields, not a sign of the farm was left. And he thought, as he often thought, about his life back then. It had been a good life, but he did not regret the things that had happened. It was not Tommy's nature to regret things, and on the night of the fire, in the midst of his galloping fear, he understood that all that mattered in this world were his wife and his children, and he thought that people lived their whole lives not knowing this as sharply, as consistently as he did. Privately, he thought of the fire as a sign from God to keep this gift tightly to him. Privately, because he did not want to be thought of as a man who made up excuses for a tragedy, and he did not want anyone, not even his dearly beloved wife, to think that he would do this. But he had felt that night, while his wife kept the children over by the road, he had rushed them from the house when he saw that the barn was on fire. As he watched the enormous flames flying into the nighttime sky, then heard the terrible screaming sounds of the cows as they died, He had felt many things, but it was just as the roof of his house crashed in, fell into the house itself, right into their bedrooms and the living room below, with all the photos of the children and his parents. As he saw this happen, he had felt, undeniably, what he could only think was the presence of God. And he understood why angels had always been portrayed as having wings, because there had been a sensation of that, of a rushing sound, or not even a sound, and then it was as though God, who had no face but was God, pressed up against him and conveyed to him without words, so briefly, so fleetingly, some message that Tommy understood to be, "It's all right, Tommy." And then Tommy had understood that it was all right. It was beyond his understanding, but it was all right. And it had been. He often thought that his children had become more compassionate as a result of having to go to school with kids who were poor, and not from homes like the one they had first known. He had felt the presence of God since, at times, as though a golden color was very near to him, but he never again felt visited by God as he had felt that night, and he knew too well what people would make of it, and this is why he would keep it to himself until his dying day, the sign from God. Thanks. Nice chairs.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to ask more about the story, even though it might be a spoiler for some people. But it turns out that all of these things you believed aren't really true, or there's some truth there that upends his whole belief about that.
You mean about Tommy's sign from God?
His sign from God.
Yeah.
His culpability for the fire.
Right.
Everything.
Right. Exactly. It's a little bit of a sad story in that sense. I mean, Tommy's okay because he's Tommy, but the way it ends with his doubting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, I know.
This is unusual as a collection because it really connects back to a novel you wrote. My name is Lucy Barton, and I usually focus on the book from the author, and I don't usually go read another book, but I did. I read that as well. So how did that happen? Was there did these characters who, in many cases, were just mentioned, did they just stick with you and you felt
They did. They just did. And so I wrote pieces of this book as I was writing My Name is Lucy Barton because, people interest me. They just fascinate me. And so if somebody was interesting enough to make it into the pages of Lucy Barton, then she or he was interesting enough for me to think about later. Or even at the same time, like I would literally go to a different part of the table where I work and write some scenes about Mississippi Mary or whoever, and I just was doing that, but concentrating on Lucy.
Are you done with these characters, or did this spur even more?
Well, I mean, you don't know. I don't know. I think I'm done, but.
And in this, like the other two authors, this is a fictional place.
Yeah, Amgash does not exist.
A real town. And you're from Maine. Yeah. You're not from Illinois. So why did you choose, to set this particular book?
I think because it was very freeing for me. But it was really because when I was writing about Lucy Barton and I saw her in the hospital room with her mother who had never been on a plane, and I began to understand almost right away, I thought, wait a minute, Lucy comes from sky. She comes from sky. And there's sky in Maine, but not like sky.
Right.
And so, and I'd been out to the Midwest a number of times. And so once I realized that, and I saw this tiny little house with sky, and it was very freeing for me. So we made a number of trips back out there.
I was going to ask you that. So you went out and found...
Yeah, for different seasons,
found
to check.
the landscape to write about it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And Lucy Barton also then appears in this book. And she actually is threaded through almost every story.
Probably in some way, yeah.
And what was the impetus for that? Did you feel like they were still connected to her because it came out of that?
The truth is, I don't think I've ever publicly said this before, but I'll tell you. The truth is, I kind of had the idea that Lucy would write these stories. Because Lucy's a writer, and I thought, okay, well then she'll write these stories. But it just didn't work write. It felt like too much of a device or something, you know? So I thought, no, I'm the writer, I'll write the stories. So what was your question?
It doesn't matter because that was a good answer.
Okay, anyway. Yeah.
There seems, in Lucy Barton and in this book, there seems to be really strong mother-daughter relationships. And you know, there are a couple, like Mississippi Mary you mentioned,
Right.
a couple of the women who'd left their families at a certain point,
Right.
and the daughters were reconciling to them.
Right. Right. I think, I mean, I obviously, you know, I'm not stupid, so I understand that I do have a mother-daughter thing. You know.
Are you the mother or the daughter in
Both.
the mother-daughter thing?
Both. I have a daughter and I have a mother.
Right.
So I see the whole circle. But, you know, I realized that with Amy and Isabel. I thought, oh, no, got a mother-daughter thing going on here.
Yeah.
And it's never completely fleshed itself out.
This didn't do the trick?
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry.
No, that's okay. I don't want to cut you off. Another interesting thing I think about this collection is, you know, it does bill itself also as a novel, and it's in chronological order, isn't it? The order of events, pretty much, because it seems as though in a later story, Tommy and
Yes. Right.
you know, he comes back to the point of view of the other character.
You're right.
But
It is in chronological order. Right. Because we see Tommy later on through Pete's point of view, and the relationship they have in this story has progressed to a new relationship. And then Charlie Macaulay progresses into his new relationship with Patty Nicely, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it is chronologically told. Right.
And did you? So you had to invent new characters for this book as well to support the characters that were mentioned in the first book.
But you know, it's like the people in this book, they were very real for me. Well, I mean, they have to be for me to continue to write them. Otherwise, if they're not, they just get tossed on the floor, literally. But these people were very, very real to me. And I didn't write them in order, because I don't write anything in order. I don't even write a story from beginning to end. You know, I just don't do that. So I had patches of all these people, and I began to see, like, oh, okay. Well, let's have, you know, Angelina mention to her mother.
Right.
Let's just have her mention. That's all we need to know, is that Patty Nicely is now with Charlie.
So how does that work if you don't write the story in order? Where do you start? Just wherever you feel like starting, and then you see what it needs, whether it needs to go back?
Yeah. What I learned years and years ago, when I had a very small amount of time each day to write, no, not even each day, but you know, maybe 3 days a week, I had like an hour or something. I learned many years ago that if I sat down and wrote something that was not bothering me, but you know, like at any given point in time, I sort of realized there's something that we're thinking about more than others. There's something, you know, and it might be, you know, is the babysitter going to show up, or is my husband having an affair? You know, I mean, all sorts of different things can be bothering us at certain times. And so, you know, it's like, so if I could take whatever was most pressing in my own chest and just put that emotion, completely transpose it, but use the emotion in a scene, then the scene would probably last or have a better chance of lasting than if I just was trying to write the beginning of a story.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's when I learned to write in scenes that would have, hopefully, a heartbeat to them. And I would just have scenes and scenes and scenes, and then I began to realize, oh, look, some of these are connecting. And so that's...
Lucky for you.
Well, many years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it like, you know, you said the characters are very real to you. So what is that, how does that play out when you're writing? Is it, you almost feel like you're channeling the character, or how do you...
I mean, you know what, let me just make it clear. I know that I'm writing them.
Yeah.
Okay. But I just feel like I really am inside them. I mean, I really do feel like I have to become them as much as it's possible to become another person. It's consuming.
It's just a thought process that you have?
You mean, do I dress up like Tommy?
No,
it goes in my head. It's all in my head.
I'm trying to understand how that reality presents itself to you and how you take that reality and turn it into something on a page.
I think about them all the time. Like I'll just be thinking about them, if I'm walking down the sidewalk to, buy eggs or something, which I actually haven't done for quite a while. But the point is, if I do something, I'm thinking about them. I'm just thinking about the person that I'm trying to inhabit.
And when the story's done, are you done thinking about them?
Yeah. It's terrible.
You're looking for a new character to think about.
I mean, I always, they linger a little in my heart, but yes, I'm pretty fickle, actually. I'm on to the next.
Yeah, the Lucy Barton story in this, the one she appears in, it's not really her point of view, it's her brother's, I think.
Right.
Or it shifts maybe even.
No, but it's her brother's point of view.
So
it's from his point of view.
So were you thinking about that? It feels like a centerpiece almost to the book.
That was actually a conscious decision. So much of what I do starts out as an unconscious business, and then I have to make conscious decisions. But I really right away I had to make a conscious decision whether or not to have Lucy show up in this book. And I just didn't know if I should do it, because Lucy Barton, in My Name is Lucy Barton, it's a first-person narration, and it's her voice. That's who Lucy is. It's her voice. And so I thought, I don't know that we can have Lucy without her voice. I just wasn't sure about it. But then as I got to know Pete, and I was sort of thinking, oh, okay, Pete, you can do this for us, and we can see Lucy from an entirely different point of view, and we do.
Pete's a sad guy.
Yeah.
There's something I think, and that's interesting in the book, is there seems to be this legacy of pain or trauma that seems to get passed down from one generation to another. A couple, I think, are through war experiences.
Right. Well, the war is the ultimate kind of crisis that, both Charlie Macaulay with Vietnam and Lucy's father with World War II, they happened to be men that couldn't do that.
Right. They snap in a way.
Yeah. And some people can do it, and they couldn't do it in their own different ways. Charlie was obviously able to maintain a little more. But
and then
that's the ultimate.
That expresses itself in how they behave towards their families, and then that becomes something that...
Sure. Yeah.
So what do you think, when you think about your characters, do you think there's a way out for them, a way to not pass that legacy on, to escape it, or is it...
Well, is there ever a way out for any of us to not pass on something? I mean, yes. Well, I mean, yes, their way out is what this book is all about. The way out is always in these little tiny moments of grace.
Right.
And that is, I think, available to most people. And so that's the way out that we have.
It's like a lifeline you're offering your characters.
Yeah,
in a way.
they're just moments, but they're not just moments. They're huge, they're small moments in life, but they're large moments in the life of these people, even if they seem like a small moment.
Right. Do you ever find that as you're experiencing this character that you'll write something and then you'll look back and you'll say, no, he wouldn't do that, or she wouldn't say that, or do you feel like you really lock in and get a pretty strong feeling?
No, I mean, some characters do not come to me as strongly, and I have to, and again, it's like they either end up on the floor or they don't, and if they don't and they're not coming to me that strongly, then I really have to scratch away and make sure that I know who they are by the time I finish with the story. And others just somehow appear more fully formed. I don't know why. I just don't know why at all.
Yeah. It's the mystery of it.
It's the mystery of it, yeah.
And because you've chosen Illinois in particular, do you hear from people from Illinois and say,
I do.
This is exactly what it's like? Or
I do, actually. Yeah. I heard from, because there are places in this that are real, like, excuse me for a moment while I check.
Chicago?
No. Rockford. Like Rockford, where Abel Blaine and Dottie were from, and that's a real place. And this woman wrote to me, and she said, I was raised in Rockford. And she wrote me about it. It was just very interesting. She said, you got it right. And I was so, of course, very glad to hear that. But it was so interesting to hear from her describing this town to me, the city.
Did you have a geography in mind of where Amgash was relative to all these other places?
I did a little bit, yeah. Yeah, I had a sense of where it was, right.
Nothing you diagram or map out, just this
No, but
I had sense.
By the time we had traveled around, I understood where I thought it was. Which is about an hour from Rockford.
As the crow flies.
As the crow flies.
The title of the book is something that comes in really toward the end of the book.
Yeah.
And was it at that point that you knew that was the title of the book?
Yes, it wasn't until I wrote that last line, which I wrote way before I wrote the rest of the story.
Oh, so you started.
Because that's just how I work. So that last scene, it wasn't the first scene I wrote, but that last scene was not, it was there before the story was there, is what I'm saying. And that I thought, okay, this is interesting, and that stayed with me. And then I worried about it called Anything is Possible, because it's like, that's a false sentence. Anything is possible. we all know and yet, I will never be the Queen of England, or,
right.
Things like that. We do know that not anything is possible. But in this book, the concept of anything is possible, refers to those moments of grace that can come unbidden. So I called it Anything is Possible.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much.
And now, Julie Lindsay, the founder of the Story Prize. Well, let's say before I get to that, let's just have a round of applause for the authors. Even though we pick a winner, for us, these are all great books that we feel strongly about, and they're all really equal in our minds at this event until that final moment. Sorry, Julie. So now, Julie Lindsay, the founder of the Story Prize, will announce this year's winner.
Those were great conversations. I think the best I've ever heard in an evening here. Ottessa, Elizabeth, and Daniel, thank you for your readings. They were great too. And but I really love the conversations. And thank you to this year's judges who had the hard job of choosing tonight's winner. All three collections were very strong, and for me, rank among my favorites I've read in all these years. Tonight is our 14th year of the Story Prize, and our mission is the same today as it was 14 years ago, to bring focus to the short story and the artists who create them. Two of our finalists this evening will take home a prize check of $5,000 each. The winner will receive the grand prize of $20,000. Our congratulations goes to this year's winner, Elizabeth Strout. For Anything is Possible. Elizabeth, will you come up to accept the award?
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really, thank you. I thought the other people were very, very, very strong. And thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. So
sorry. You're so surprised.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Why don't you stay up here?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for coming tonight, and we'll see you next year.